Hey y'all. You've just watched a short little video on poetic meter and why it's important. That video, though, didn't give you much by the way of talking about poetic meter. So I want to do that through this little YouTube video. I'll solicit some feedback from you on whether this was helpful or not, because this is something that usually gets covered in class. Poetic meter in English poetry and American poetry, at least, is almost always based on what we call the poetic foot. And this is the idea that our natural speech patterns follow a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. And that poets play with this, that they will use a particular pattern over the course of poetic lines to generate certain sound effects in the poem. For those of you who are in music, who understand music, this is similar to saying that a song is written in 4/4 time or 3/4 time. If you have experience with music, you know that those sound very different. And the choice of the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables will have a similar effect in poetry. So we need to talk about what a syllable is. That sounds like a silly thing to say, but I've found over the past couple of years that it's probably a good thing to go ahead and talk about it. A syllable is any of the parts into which a word is naturally divided when it is pronounced. So this is the idea that when we say a word like syllable, there are three separate sounds that make up that word. Syllable. Whereas a word like is, there's really only one sound that we have to make to create that word. Naturally. That one could be debatable, really. Do we say naturally, 3 syllables, or naturally, 4 syllables? Some of that will depend on region, accent, all those kinds of things. But for the most part, the number of syllables in a word should be pretty consistent. Pronounced, 2 syllables. So pause for a moment and divide your name up into syllables to see how many it has. Okay, so my name, Devin, 2 syllables. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So then, if we know what a syllable is, what does it mean to talk about a stressed syllable or an unstressed syllable? The idea here is that when we speak, we naturally place a heavier emphasis on certain syllables than on others. You all do this unconsciously. If we didn't, what you see on the screen here would read something like this. Stressed, unstressed, whether a syllable is emphasized, stressed, or not, unstressed, relative to the syllables around it. Not our normal speech in any way, shape, or form. Instead, when we say a word like whether, we're placing a much heavier emphasis on the first half of the word. Whether. Otherwise, it would come out as whether, which really no one says. Let's try another one. Around. I hope you can hear a much heavier stress on the second syllable. Around. Otherwise, we'd have to say something like around, which just, again, not how we talk. So let's go back to your name. Pause for a moment and mark which syllables in your name you think get heavier emphasis. Okay, so let's take a look at my name and you'll see why this is important. This right here is how I pronounce my name. Devin. Heavier emphasis on the first syllable. When I was in grade school, though, I often got teachers who didn't know me who would think that my name was actually pronounced Devon. Very different sound for my name. I never really appreciated that very much. So the way in which you stress syllables can be important. So we've got now the idea that we have syllables. Some of them are stressed or unstressed. Now, I don't know where they came up with these names. They're probably Greek words. We can figure this out. But over time, we have identified certain patterns as being very common in the English language, and we've given them names. So when you have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, that is called an iamb. When you have a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, that's called a trochee. When you have an unstressed syllable followed by another unstressed syllable and then a stressed syllable, that is an anapest. And when you have a stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables, that's called a dactyl. Just a little tip to help you remember these. The ones that begin with vowels, iamb and anapest, begin with unstressed syllables. That always helps me a little bit. So we've got these names. And one of the things that you'll be asked to do is, in a poetry class like this one, is to analyze the poetic meter of a poem. To figure out the poetic meter of a poem takes a number of steps, and I'm going to kind of walk you through these. The first step is to take several lines of the poem and mark the stressed and unstressed syllables in them. Why several lines of a poem? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that sometimes poets will play around with the meter, and if you choose a line that is out of the ordinary, you're not going to be able to identify what the dominant meter of the poem is. The other reason is that sometimes poets will alternate. They'll use one particular pattern in one line and a different pattern in the second, then back to the first, then back to the second, and so forth. So it helps to look at several lines, marking the stressed and unstressed syllables. Second, we then determine which is the predominant metrical foot. What pattern do you see the most of? Iambs, trochees, anapests, or dactyls? Once you've done that, then you can count how many of those there are in each line. Are there 4 iambs? Are there 5 trochees? And then once you've got that, you can name the poetic meter. You combine the name of the foot, and if it is iambs, we say that it is iambic. If they are trochees, we say it is a trochaic meter. If they're anapests, it is anapestic. Or if it is primarily dactyls, we call it dactylic. So you take that name and combine it with the number that are in the line. If there is only 1 iamb per line, we call this monometer. If there are 2, it is dimeter. If it is 3, that is trimeter, not trimeter, trimeter. Tetrameter is 4, pentameter is 5, hexameter is 6, heptameter is 7, octometer is 8. There's probably a term for a line that has 9 feet in it, but I don't know what it is. I can't think that I've ever seen a poem that is like that. So the term that you're probably most familiar with is iambic pentameter. So what exactly does that mean? What it means is that the line is composed of iambs. If you remember, that's an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one, and that there are 5 of them. Iambic pentameter. Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Oops, that's back to my name. Examples are over here. 'Tis hard to say if greater want of skill. That's the first line from Alexander Pope's poem, An Essay on Criticism. If I read that slowly, 'tis hard to say if greater want of skill. And I'm going to highlight the stressed syllables. Hard to say if greater want of skill. So you can see here, we have a pattern of unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, over and over again. And how many of them are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a classic line of iambic pentameter. So let's move on to another one. This is a line from Alfred Tennyson's poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league, onward. If you listen carefully, these stressed syllables are half, half, half. It's easy in a poem like this one. Once you've figured out part of it, it just repeats over and over. Half a league, half a league, half a league, onward and on. And you can see the predominant pattern is stressed followed by 2 unstressed syllables, which we would say is a dactylic meter. And how many of them are there? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tetrameter. It's important to note that often poets will leave off the final unstressed syllable of a line, or sometimes at the beginning of a line they'll leave off an unstressed syllable. That doesn't change the fact that it is still dactylic tetrameter. Next one, and this is from a poem by Byron. I don't remember the title of it. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. So I'll read that again. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. The way that I would read this, this is the stressed syllable here. And this is one of those words where when you hear it pronounced, it sounds like 3 syllables, although technically you could pronounce it with 4. The Assyrian, but most of us pull those together into the Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. So we have 2 unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable, repeated 1, 2, 3, 4 times. That came unhighlighted. So 2 unstressed followed by a stressed syllable, we call an anapest. So this is an anapestic meter. And like the line before it, there are 4 of them, so it is tetrameter. And this is simply the next line of that poem, so we're not going to mess with that one. So you can see how this works. It's a matter of figuring out what is the predominant poetic foot, how many of those feet are there per line, and then creating the name for it. That in and of itself is not all we need to do with meter, but that's as far as we're going to go here. We'll talk more about meter in class on Wednesday and clarify any confusion. I suspect there will be some. This is not a simple concept, and if you haven't entirely felt like you've grasped it, that's okay at this point. So I will see you in class on Wednesday.